Thank you very much, Peter. I appreciate it. Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this very important conference on our changing oceans. It's a privilege to be here. This would be an important subject at any time, but it is especially important at a time when we are making critical decisions about the future of offshore energy development in the United States. I know that you've had a long and no doubt exciting day, and it's actually a daunting task to be your final speaker today, because I know that some of you are eager to go to the reception that Peter just mentioned. But I know that earlier this morning you heard from the co-chairs of the National Commission on the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill and offshore drilling, as well as from Interior Secretary Ken Salazar. I was here during Secretary Salazar's remarks. Now, in my remarks this afternoon, I want to discuss the steps that my agency is taking to renew its commitment to the responsible stewardship of our nation's resources on the Outer Continental Shelf, and importantly, to rebalance our decision-making processes with a renewed emphasis on acquiring and analyzing scientific information. The Deepwater Horizon tragedy has shaken government and, I hope, industry out of a complacency and overconfidence that had developed over the past several decades. That complacency and overconfidence created a situation in which the increased dangers of deepwater drilling were not matched by increased vigilance and concern for the safety of those operations. We are in the process of making profound changes in the manner in which oil and gas drilling and development in the waters off our country's shores is done. These changes are long overdue, and is, as so often the case when it comes to serious reform anywhere, in any business, in any endeavor, they're being spurred by a catastrophe. The unprecedented deepwater blowout of the Macondo well, the explosion and sinking of the Deepwater Horizon drilling rig, the tragic deaths of 11 workers, and a spill of nearly 5 million barrels of oil into the waters of the Gulf of Mexico. This week marks my 7th month as the Director of the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management Regulation and Enforcement. As you know, Secretary Salazar created the agency after the Deepwater Horizon accident to replace the former Minerals Management Service. Now, the mandate I received from President Obama and Secretary Salazar was both ambitious and urgent to reform offshore energy development, starting with the agency responsible for overseeing it. Since that time, we've been working aggressively to make the changes necessary to restore the public's confidence that offshore oil and gas drilling and production are being conducted safely and with appropriate protections for marine and coastal environments. This topic is obviously nothing if not timely. I know you heard this morning, as I mentioned before, from the distinguished co-chairs of the Commission, Bill Riley and Bob Graham. The Commission's report is a thoughtful and comprehensive analysis of not only the spill itself, but of the history and development of offshore drilling and of the regulation of offshore drilling. I want to commend the Commission and its staff for their hard work, their professionalism, and their willingness to listen to and to take into account our perspectives on the issues they were examining. I encourage each of you, if you haven't already done so, to read the report. We will continue to review and analyze the report's recommendations. As the Commission describes in its report, regulatory and industry reform after a significant offshore disaster has happened before. The United Kingdom and Norway substantially changed their oversight of offshore drilling and production following the Piper Alpha and the Alexander Keeland incidents. Australia is currently facing many of the same issues we are confronting because of the Montara blowout, which occurred only 8 months before Deepwater Horizon. The specific challenges facing us, however, are unique in many significant respects. The scale of the offshore oil and gas operations in U.S. waters, particularly in the Gulf of Mexico, is vastly greater than those in the North Sea. The economies of many of the Gulf Coast states, particularly Louisiana, are closely tied to offshore industry to an extent that is not fully appreciated around the country. The Gulf accounts for more than 25% of domestic oil production and approximately 12% of domestic gas production. One of the key problems that we are addressing and that cannot be avoided is this: how will government and industry make the fundamental reforms necessary to improve the safety and environmental protection in this massive industry, while at the same time allowing operations to continue. To illustrate the problem, consider this. UK offshore production, which again is at a much smaller scale than that in the Gulf, dropped off very substantially for 2 full years following the Piper Alpha incident. Now, the major challenge facing us and the industry is to dramatically improve the safety of drilling in the Gulf of Mexico, particularly in deep water, while continuing with operations, keeping production flowing and keeping people working. While the Commission has been doing its work, we at BOMR have been busy seeking to address many of the issues identified by the Commission. Let me be specific about what we've already done and what we plan to do in the future. Together with Secretary Salazar, we have undertaken the most aggressive and comprehensive reform of offshore oil and gas regulation and oversight in U.S. history. This includes the reorganization of the former MMS to establish mission clarity and to strengthen oversight. And it also includes the development and implementation of heightened standards for drilling practices, safety equipment, and environmental safeguards. These new rules set forth prescriptive standards that industry must meet, but they also establish for the first time in the U.S. offshore regulatory system performance-based standards focused on the identification and mitigation of specific risks associated with offshore operations. These changes are substantial, and more work is being done to ensure that these changes are both lasting and effective. The ultimate goal is to establish an industry-wide culture of safety and to have well-equipped and professional regulators. Both elements are necessary to keep pace with the challenges and risks of offshore drilling. That is especially important as those operations push into new frontiers and face increased technical challenges. Now, earlier today, as Peter mentioned, Secretary Salazar and I announced the details of our reorganization. As most of you know, the Secretary initially outlined the guiding idea behind the plan as long ago as May of 2010. And that was the creation of 3 strong independent agencies with clearly defined roles and missions. MMS had conflicting missions of promoting resource development, enforcing safety regulations, and maximizing revenues from offshore operations. Those conflicts and the agency's chronic lack of resources led to its inability to effectively meet all of the challenges of overseeing companies in the offshore industry operating in U.S. waters. The reorganization of the former MMS is designed to remove those conflicts. It does so by clarifying and separating missions across 3 agencies and providing each of the new agencies with clear missions and the organizational and human resources necessary to fulfill those missions. Now, we are designing and implementing these organizational changes while we fully take into account the crucial need for information sharing and the other links between the functions of the former MMS. This is essential to ensure that regulatory processes that are related to offshore leasing, plan approval, and permitting do not become bogged down and cause unacceptable delays. On October 1 of last year, the revenue collection arm of the former MMS became the Office of Natural Resources Revenue and now is located in a different part of the Interior Department with a reporting structure and chain of command completely separate from the offshore regulator. The President's Commission agrees fully with this change. Over the coming months, the offshore resource management and enforcement programs will be established as separate independent organizations. That's what we announced earlier today. These next steps in the reorganization are more difficult, but also extremely important. They involve separating the energy development functions from the safety and environmental enforcement missions of the nation's offshore regulator. The Interior Department, as well as the President's Commission, has concluded that the separation of these missions is essential to reforming the government's oversight of energy development in our country's oceans. Now, I want to share with you some of the details of what those 2 new independent agencies, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, BOEM, and the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, BSEE or BSEE, will look like and what their distinct missions will be. Because this reorganization is more than just moving boxes around on an organization chart. It's about making fundamental and carefully considered changes in the way these agencies operate. The new Bureau of Ocean Energy Management will be responsible for managing development of the nation's offshore resources. This involves ensuring that the environment is protected and that the nation's offshore energy resources, including oil, gas, and renewable resources, are developed wisely, economically, and in the country's best interests. The new Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, or BSEE, will independently and rigorously enforce safety and environmental regulations. Now, over the past many months, we have been engaged in a thorough and comprehensive analysis to ensure that we address the structural and conflict of interest problems that existed in the former MMS, and to plan for the orderly establishment of the new bureaus. We have worked with and received advice from leading experts in government transformations and examined closely the offshore regulatory regimes of other nations, including the UK and Norway. We also have considered and will continue to bear in mind the recommendations of the President's Commission, which has done its own analysis of these issues. One of the important steps in our planning and analysis was to ensure that we can implement these changes while minimizing the disruptions to the Bureau's daily operations. We did this by discussing the reorganization with employees throughout BOMER, our current organization. We received their input, collected and analyzed data relating to the Bureau's processes, systems, and regulatory metrics, and developed a number of alternative models and options for restructuring and reforming the Bureau. This work has been painstaking and time-consuming, but it has been essential to making informed decision-making regarding the transformation of the current Bureau into the two new agencies. I want to highlight a couple of the more significant changes we are making that may be of considerable interest to you because they promote the principles of independence, development of rigorous and thorough science, and they advance safety and environmental protection. We have separated resource management from safety oversight. This allows permitting engineers and inspectors who are central to overseeing safe operations greater independence, more budgetary autonomy, and clearer missions and leadership focus. Our goal is to create a tough-minded but fair regulator that can effectively keep pace with the risks of offshore drilling and will promote the development of safety cultures in offshore operators. Next, we provide a structure that ensures sound environmental reviews are conducted and that the potential environmental effects of proposed operations are given appropriate weight in making resource management decisions in BOEM. This is to ensure that leasing and plan approval activities are properly balanced. These processes must be both rigorous and efficient so that operations can go forward in a timely way and with a complete understanding of their potential environmental impacts, as well as with confidence that appropriate mitigations against those potential environmental effects are in place. We're also strengthening the role of environmental review and analysis in both organizations through various structural and organizational mechanisms. Those include the following steps: the creation of a first-ever Chief Environmental Officer in BOEM. This person will be responsible for ensuring that environmental concerns are appropriately balanced in leasing and planning decisions and for helping set the scientific agenda relative to our oceans. This is a new, high-profile, and extremely important position. I'm very excited about it. We hope and expect it will attract top-flight talent. In addition, we're going forward with a separation of the environmental review from the leasing program in BOEM's regional offices. We are creating a new plan approval process in BOEM, and we are working to develop for the first time a brand new environmental compliance and enforcement function which will reside in BSEE. And finally, we are strengthening as a national level priority the review and enforcement of oil spill response plans, which will be carried out in BSEE. Now, these reforms are in general alignment with the President's Commission's recommendations. And as we move forward with implementing these important and enormous changes, we will continue to take the Commission's recommendations into account in designing the final structure of and interactions between BOEM and BSEE within the Department of the Interior. Let me turn next to describing another important initiative we're pursuing. One of the guiding principles of our reform agenda for offshore energy development is a fundamental change in the approach to decision-making, which includes a renewed commitment to developing thorough, credible, and unfiltered scientific data as the foundation for our work and our decisions. Over the past few decades, as industry sought new productive discoveries, sought to increase domestic oil and gas supplies, and provide the country with greater energy independence, oil and gas development moved farther and farther offshore. Important science has always been conducted and has been involved in these developments. But we have concluded from the reviews of the Presidential Commission, as well as those we have conducted internally, that our scientific community within the former MMS has not always had a strong enough voice. We are changing that. This past September, Secretary Salazar issued a secretarial order establishing a scientific integrity policy for the department. My senior science advisor, Alan Thornhill, who is here today, played a leading role in drafting that policy, and we as a Bureau are wholeheartedly embracing its principles. Scientific and scholarly information considered in our decision-making must be sound, it must be of the highest quality, and it must be the product of rigorous scientific and scholarly processes. Nothing less will do. To achieve those goals, we must cultivate and reinforce a culture of scientific integrity. This means that our employees, political and career, must never suppress or alter, without new scientific or technological evidence, scientific or technical findings or conclusions. Never. Period. Further, employees will not be coerced to alter or censor scientific findings, and they will be protected if they uncover and report scientific misconduct. Now, this is not about finding fault with the past, because the truth is that the agency's scientific work has in many instances been unfairly maligned. It is instead a strong commitment and prescription for the future. Now, this also means we have to devote greater resources to and elevate the role of our scientists. As I mentioned earlier, we are for the first time establishing the position of a Chief Environmental Officer for BOEM. This person will be empowered at the national level to make decisions and final recommendations when leasing and environmental program directors cannot reach agreement. The Chief Environmental Officer also will be a major player in setting the scientific agenda for the nation's oceans. And by standing up an entirely new environmental compliance function for BSEE, we are providing for the first time regulatory oversight focused on the environment. As many of you know, we are in the midst of a review of our application of NEPA, including in particular the use of categorical exclusions. We have obtained comments on our NEPA policy, and we are in the process of reviewing and analyzing the comments we've received. We are working closely with the Council on Environmental Quality on this evaluation. In the meantime, we have announced a policy that will require that site-specific environmental assessments be conducted, as opposed to the categorical exclusion reviews performed in the past, for all deep-water drilling operations. Those environmental assessments will be conducted for all new and revised exploration and development plans in deep water. For those who might now be thinking that the pendulum is swinging too far to the other side, we believe that's not the case. We are mindful of the fact that industry must continue developing the energy resources that exist offshore. This development is crucial to the economy, to employment, and to energy independence. We are striving to ensure an appropriate balance between the imperatives of energy development and awareness of the potential environmental effects of energy development, and to ensure that appropriate measures are taken to protect against those effects. Creating and maintaining a culture of scientific integrity will enable us to make those decisions with greater confidence that we will be able to pursue energy development while having a full science-based understanding of the risks posed by that activity and what can and should be done to reduce those risks. Now, I've discussed so far some of the reforms that we are pursuing to improve the effectiveness of government oversight of offshore energy development and drilling. I've discussed those many times in recent weeks. My view is that those changes are both substantial and necessary. But as the Commission's report makes abundantly clear, industry must change as well. My agency has a clear and important role in helping to spur that change. And we are doing so through the promulgation of new prescriptive regulations to bolster safety and to enhance the evaluation and reduction of environmental risks. We have raised the bar already for safety equipment and environmental safeguards in the drilling and production stages of offshore operations, and we will continue to do so in an open and transparent way in the coming months and years. We've also introduced for the first time performance-based standards similar to those used by regulators in the North Sea. We have done all this through the development and implementation of 2 new rules for drilling and workplace safety announced last fall that raise standards for the oil and gas industry's operations on the Outer Continental Shelf, and through certain notices to lessees that provide additional guidance to operators on how to comply with existing regulations. Now, as you can see, as you can hear, we have already put in place significant pieces of our comprehensive reform agenda, but our work is far from complete. The technology associated with offshore drilling will continue to evolve, as will the complexities and risks of those operations, particularly in frontier environments such as ultra-deep water and the Arctic. We will proceed through the normal notice and comment rulemaking process to implement further safety measures, including features of the next generation of subsea containment equipment such as blowout preventers, which we're all now familiar with, and remotely operated vehicles. As we've already stated, the Bureau will also promulgate additional workplace safety reforms through the rulemaking process, including requirements for independent third-party verification of operators' workplace safety or SEMS programs. We also will continue to evaluate the regulatory standards used by other countries to ensure that the standards applied in the U.S. waters, as well as the agency that enforces those standards, are world-class. These are among the many issues discussed in the Commission's report, and the Commission provides useful insights about these issues. We can no longer accept the view that the appropriate response to a rapidly evolving, developing, and changing industry, which employs increasingly sophisticated technologies, is for the regulatory framework and the applicable rules to remain unchanged for extended periods of time. Over time, the regulatory framework and the specific requirements must keep up with advances in the industry and a pace of industry ambitions to drill in deeper water in geological formations that have greater pressures. We will continue to analyze information that becomes available, and we will implement reforms necessary to make offshore oil and gas production safer, smarter, and with stronger protections for workers and for the environment. In developing these reforms, we will balance the need for regulatory certainty, the importance of which we well recognize, against the need to act on new insights and adapt to changing technology. And importantly, the processing of drilling permit applications and proposed drilling plans will not be delayed while these additional reforms are developed. As you and I both know, we can always do better, and that we must always remain open to improvements in our regulations to develop the necessary culture of safety. In the past, industry has in many instances reflexively opposed new regulations. Some important episodes of that are detailed in the Commission's report. That kind of reflexive opposition is no more responsible than regulating for the sake of regulating. We must strike a new balance that fully involves industry in the regulatory process, that recognizes the need for us to exercise independent judgment. Our challenge in the months and years ahead is to ensure that we do not once again become complacent, but rather that we continue to make progress in developing state-of-the-art safety, containment, and response capabilities. Government, industry, and the best minds in our universities must collaborate on ongoing research and development to create cutting-edge cutting-edge technologies in areas such as well-conditioned sensor capabilities and remote BOP activation, among many others. Government and industry must also work together to establish the necessary procedures and structures to address containment in the case of a blowout. It's absolutely critical to ensure that in the event of a loss of well control, containment resources are immediately available, as they were not in the case of Deepwater Horizon, regardless of the owner or operator involved. These are goals that we must pursue and pursue aggressively. As an important step in this effort, the Department of the Interior, as Secretary Salazar told you this morning, is establishing the Offshore Energy Safety Advisory Committee, which is the first step in creating the Ocean Energy Institute. The Advisory Committee and Institute will serve as centers of excellence for offshore energy safety, and they will facilitate collaboration among the nation's brightest minds from industry, academia, federal agencies, and from non-governmental organizations. The Institute will foster collaboration among all key stakeholders to increase offshore energy safety. The Institute will also provide recommendations on matters and actions relating to offshore energy safety, including drilling and workplace safety, well intervention and containment, and spill response, as well as collaborative research and development, training, and execution, and these and other areas relating to offshore energy safety. As we seek partnerships with the communities that have legitimate interests in oil and gas development, we also must continue our important work in funding and conducting strong and sound scientific research. We must work with experts and researchers across many disciplines to ensure we have the best scientific information available regarding the potential effects of offshore energy development on the marine and coastal environment. Each year, BOMER and the former MMS funds nearly $30 million in environmental research for the Atlantic, for the Gulf of Mexico, for the Pacific, and for the Arctic. We have well-established partnerships with a number of universities and with other federal agencies, many of which are represented in the audience today, including NOAA, USGS, the EPA, and the Fish and Wildlife Service, among many others. We are working very hard to strengthen those partnerships and provide for greater consultation regarding the complex issues facing us. If I've learned nothing else in the 7 months I've been on this job, I have learned that passions run deep with respect to offshore energy exploration. I am committed to continuing conversations and hard work with industry, environmental organizations, our federal partners, and other stakeholders, which are all intended to improve the safety of offshore energy operations and to help strike the difficult but appropriate balance among the many legitimate concerns and interests that lie at the heart of offshore energy development. And I am committed to firmly establishing a culture in this agency and the 2 successor bureaus that follow, in which decisions are based on scientific information of the highest quality and untainted by political influence. I thank you very much for your time and attention, and I'm happy to entertain questions.